birthday's 18th, I guess, of September.
1992.
Yeah.
We're doing an interview with Mom here about getting ready for a celebration of your 50th wedding anniversary. And I'm going to ask you to tell us a few things about that. First, why don't you just tell us about yourself? Where were you born, who your parents were, things of that sort.
Yeah, I was born in Coltman, Idaho, in my grandmother's house. And my uncle lived there, and my grandmother, and my aunt, and a great-great-uncle, and dad and mother, and
Holy smokes. All those people in one house?
my brother, Grant, who was the oldest. And then before we moved from there, I had a younger brother, Merrill. Yeah, we all lived, it was a two-story house. And we all lived there on the farm.
Your dad was a farmer or what?
Yeah, he was a farmer. He and Uncle Adolph farmed the farm that Grandpa had. We had ours on one side of the road, and Uncle Adolph had his on the other side of the road. And then eventually, the folks were starting a house, and I was 5 years old when we moved out. There was a big worry about a flood coming down the Snake River, and it was coming down by the headers of the Idaho Canal, and these people came dashing up and says, you better get out, it's really coming down, and it'll come clear up here to the house is about 1,000 feet maybe, or less than that from the creek. And so Uncle Adolph and none of them would move, but this was what actually put us into our home that wasn't finished yet. And so for I don't know how long we'd haul water in the big milk cans, and of course we grew up with the outhouses and everything else, no telephone, no electricity, and all of that.
Now the first house is kind of where Adolph's house is now?
Yes.
And
yes.
then the house you moved into is where Jerry's living now?
Yes,
All right. Well, so where'd you go to school?
I went to school at Coltman Elementary School, and then that was 2 miles, a quarter of a mile south and 2 miles east of our place. And then when I went to high school, went to Yukon High.
How far was that?
That was about 5 miles east.
You had to walk every day, waist-deep snow, right?
Well, we actually go to Yukon in the wintertime. A neighbor boy would drive a sleigh, and I'd walk down to the corner, and Grant and I'd walk down to the corner and get on the sleigh. It was a quarter of a mile.
Mm-hmm.
And the snow would be so deep, the folks would wrap my legs in newspapers, and we only had galoshes then. And then when I'd get down to the sleigh, where under the covers, I'd take the newspapers off. And then when I got home at night, I didn't have any newspapers around my legs, so the folks would be there ready to put my feet and legs into a tub of water and massage them.
I'll be darned.
Anyway, it was an experience.
Why didn't they do that for Grant?
Well, the boys had the pants.
Oh, all right.
And
Well,
girls didn't have trousers then. They didn't wear trousers. They wore dresses.
do you have 4 years of high school?
Yes. And I had 3 of seminary.
Well, why don't you tell us about how you and Dad met?
Well, the seniors would always have a senior sneak day. Of course, the people all knew where they were going, and they furnished the bus, and so we had our senior sneak day in Lava Hot Springs. And I had the 3 girlfriends with me, and
Who were they?
the old Ward, who is my daughter-in-law, sister-in-law now. And I can't even, Bernice Randall, and I can't even remember the other girl's name. Isn't that terrible?
Well, do you have a picture of them?
What was that?
Do you have a picture of them?
Yeah, they're over here.
Let's take a look. Okay, so these are the girls?
Yeah, these rests that day down at Lava Hot Springs. I guess I don't even remember what direction it was from the swimming pool, but we did more than swim. We just hiked around a lot and everything.
That was you second from the...
Around. What?
That was you second from the left here then, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, see another one.
We just were up there so we could take pictures and the fun we were having that day.
Here's one of you sitting on a log. That was up there in Lava too?
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay, here we've got you going up a hill. Where's that?
Well, that's in Lava, but that's where all the houses are now, across from the swimming pool.
I see.
Never recognized it, but the same place.
Here we've got a bunch of girls in front of a store of some kind.
Yeah, that's not far from, I don't know whether that was the concessionary or what that they had there, but anyway, it's all in Lava. And I didn't write it on the back of the pictures, so I couldn't tell you exactly where it was.
So, who'd you meet there?
Well, when we went in swimming, there were 4 guys in the pool, and they had a ball, and we decided we wanted to play with the ball.
You wanted to play with the guys.
So we started after the ball and horsed around, and all of a sudden there was an inner tube over my head, and found a guy in it with me. Scared me to death. That was how I met George.
Well, okay. What happened from there?
Well, we exchanged names, and then after we got out, I talked, and when they found out we were, well, they told us they went to ISU, or it wasn't called ISU then, it was
Southern Branch, University of Idaho Southern Branch, huh?
Yeah. Anyway, that we were seniors, and this was our senior sneak day, and that we were going to be coming down there to, what was it called? Campus Day.
Mm-hmm.
And so we made a date to meet with them on Campus Day.
Looks like you also took a picture of them.
Yeah.
Looks like one of them in the background there was taking a picture of you guys, too.
Could have been.
This picture's up in Lava, is it?
Yes.
And here the future groom is. Handsome guy. Now, I remember reading something in your diary about that day.
Oh, that was in my hymn book.
Oh, was it? Want to tell us about it?
No.
Well, I will then.
I just fell for him.
Folks, she kissed on the first date with Dad.
Well,
Well, maybe that was later. That wasn't the date.
That day. That would have been Campus Day.
I see. Well, here's a picture of some guys by a building. Is that Campus Day?
Yeah. That's probably Student Union.
Uh-huh. Okay, and here's George Wood up here on the right, wearing that Indiana Jones hat, huh?
Yeah, he wore the hat all the time.
Okay, well, what'd you do next with him?
Well, we met him on Campus Day.
And?
Viola had a brother and cousin down there, a couple of cousins down there, and so we went over there. She brought food down to her brother. Oh, and I had a cousin too, living in the same dormitory with them. And so we had lunch with them, and then that night we went to the 6th Ward to a dance, or maybe it wasn't that night, maybe it was Yeah, it was that night. And my cousin says, why don't you stay over? Viola was staying over to come back with Lauren the next day, which was Saturday. And so I sent word home with one of my girlfriends to tell the folks that I'd be home the next day with Leola. And so, like I say, we went dancing that night and had a good time.
Okay, you've got some pictures of you and Dad at this time in your life, do you?
Yeah.
Let's take a look.
Okay, George started coming up to see me. Some of these guys that were in the group would bring him up. They had a car, or other times he would just come up on the train and then go back on the train that night. And this was at the park down by the river there in Idaho Falls that we spent a lot of time down there. We'd walk from Sweeney's. They lived on 10th Street. This was one at Amy's house. She was my cousin, where she was working in town too. She and Leola also, and so we would meet and go around together. Okay, we'd gone down this one time. Sweeney's had wanted us to get him some beer, and so George
Is that what's in your hand?
had to take a picture of me holding the bottles of beer. Anyway, we had lots of fun. Okay, of course we'd go back on I had every third Sunday off, and
Where were you working?
I was working for a Catholic family called David Sweeney, and David and Kathleen Sweeney. They had two little girls there in Idaho Falls. They lived on 10th Street. And so this was a picture at the church of George and I, and this other one here is in front of our house. And George was taking flying lessons out at the airport through the college, and so he flew up this one time, and we had about 10 minutes visit before he had to turn around and fly back.
This is the airplane that he flew up there?
Yes, this was
A little Piper Cub of some kind?
Yeah, Piper Cub.
Were you impressed?
Yes, I was very impressed.
He didn't get to take you for a ride, though, huh?
Nope, he couldn't do that.
Oh.
But, okay, and this was in the backyard of Sweeney's, and took a picture of me there.
Is that your little doll, or just for effect?
I think it was just one of the kids, one of the girls. And here's one that Mrs. Sweeney took of the two of us sitting under the tree.
Good-looking couple, I'd say.
Another one that she took of us.
Well,
George and I both had the same kind of camera. We had our little brownie camera. Folks had given me mine for graduation, and I guess he'd had his for quite a few years.
holding hands behind your back there, Mom.
Yeah.
So he came up to visit you at the farm occasionally?
Yep.
What would he do there?
Well, he'd help feed the pigs, and my brothers raised Chester White hogs, and so he'd help there, and even he knew how to milk because they'd had a cow at their house in Pocatello. And I always teased him about this because he was milking her on the wrong side of the cow, and he says, well, that wasn't my fault. They turned the negative around.
I see. Okay. Here's a couple of more pictures. One on the lawn somewhere.
Okay, that's there at Amy's where she worked. She took the picture of us. This was in front of my home there on River Road, 8 miles north of Idaho Falls. That's where my brother Jerry lives now.
Okay, that's great. So, how did the romance advance?
Well, George kept coming up. He had a .22 rifle, and we'd go out and shoot at gophers and different things like that. And his different friends would bring him up. I can't even remember when he asked me to marry him, but
You can't remember the proposal?
no, he was going to go into the military, and we discussed the pro and cons. If he went into the Army, we'd have to wait 3 years to get married. If he went into the Navy, it'd have to be 4 years. But he felt like that the Navy was the best opportunity, and so he decided to go in the Navy. We had discussed it. By the time I turned 21, I could go ahead and go on an 18-month mission and get back about the time that he'd be able to marry. And but after Pearl Harbor, Secretary Knox changed that. He told the guys that they could get married when they got their commissions. So that way we were able to get married.
Mm-hmm.
He was in Seattle when Pearl Harbor happened, and we didn't even hear it on the radio. We hadn't had the radio on that morning, and my cousin Amy called me up and told me to listen to the radio, and we were just all so shocked. And I broke down and bawled, and I think most of us did. It was so terrible.
Mm-hmm. Dad wasn't a member of the church then, or was he?
No. What encouraged me to keep going with him was that when we'd gone to the dance that night, he told me that his best friend was LDS, and that he figured if you ever did join a church, it would be the LDS church.
Mm-hmm. What'd your folks think about you dating somebody who wasn't a member?
Well, they weren't the happiest about it, but they all really liked George.
Well, the fact that he came up and milked the cows might have helped.
Well, he'd go up and work, and I think he was up there for a week and helped out picking spuds with the folks. I was, of course, in Idle Falls working for the Sweeneys.
Mm-hmm.
I did housework and tended the two girls.
Mm-hmm. He probably came up for the dinners. I remember those dinners.
Yeah.
Pretty good in the middle of the day there. Okay, we found a few more pictures here, Mom. This picture is...
Oh, that's the day at senior campus day down at the stadium.
Oh, at the Spud Bowl?
Yeah.
And you talked about Dad coming up and going hunting.
Yeah, we used his .22 to hunt gophers. That was probably around Manan, or the foothills north of Idle Fall, of where the folks' house was.
Wonder if that's the same .22 that he later gave to me.
Yeah, that is.
That's it, huh? I've still got that.
15 shells.
Yeah. He'd shoot every one of them, wouldn't he?
Yeah, we did. Oh, when he'd come up to see me, my dad had let him take the old 57 Ford. And
The old what, 7? 37 or 57?
47 it must have been. Well, no. Yeah, it
Well,
had.
you got married in 42.
Yeah, okay. Anyway.
Must be 37. That looks like a 37.
Yeah, 37. Why, we'd go on, he'd take me in that car.
On dates?
Yeah. We'd go to a movie and things like that.
Here's a picture of you walking down the sidewalk. Just driving right
that's
along.
when we were going downtown from Sweeney's. We did a lot of walking around when he'd come to see me. He didn't have a car unless the guys brought him. He'd come quite a few times. He'd come on the bus or thumb his way up there, and I'd sit there waiting for the train to listen to the train whistle. This one time he went running from the house, and I I heard the train whistle, and I just knew he hadn't made it. He didn't.
He didn't.
That was one of the coldest darn nights. That he was trying to thumb a ride to get back to the hotel.
Waited till the last minute to catch the
Yeah.
train, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a picture of your dad, standing there by the back door of the house.
Yeah, he was a special guy.
Yeah.
Okay, and when he came up, he picked spuds with my brother DeLoss, and those are them when they're filling up the sacks.
Oh, I remember those days of picking spuds.
I do too. I had my share of them.
Well, so the romance progressed, and here's a picture of you on the church steps, a little closer.
Yeah, we had a friend that took that.
Yeah. Tweet twoo. Here's another picture. Got a little closer, Mom.
Yeah,
Who took this picture?
Mrs. Sweeney.
You had to pose for it 4 or 5 times, huh?
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, so all this led up to some happy times for you.
Yep.
We've got a picture. What's that?
Anyway, when he came back that was our wedding day, and he came back from Corpus Christi, Texas. He started out coming back in his 37 Plymouth, but by the time he got to San Antonio, he'd had 2 blowouts, and so he left the car there and came on the train. And
He was determined, huh?
yeah, and my dad was going to marry us. He was an ex-bishop, but this cousin of mother's had told me that he didn't think Dad would be able to do it, but he'd asked my uncle, who was the bishop, about it, and he says, yes, you can marry him. So then that morning of the 22nd, Dad goes down there to go over the ceremony with my uncle, and finds out that he wouldn't be allowed to do it. And he called me on the phone and said Uncle Jake would have to do it, and I just went into hysterics. And I said, I won't have Uncle Jake marry us. And so they called down to Salt Lake and got permission from President Heber J. Grant to go ahead for Dad to perform the ceremony.
So your dad hitched you, huh?
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I didn't know that before.
Oh, you did?
No.
For Pete's sakes, yeah.
How about that?
And his best friend was best man, and Leola was my matron of honor.
Mm-hmm.
She was engaged to Grant at that time.
And this is the happy couple on that day.
Dad paid for us to go and stay at the Bonneville Hotel that night. And then the next morning we headed for Pocatello on the train, and that was my first train ride.
How about that?
These were the trains then, the good trains. They were keeping for the troops.
As you were going to Texas?
Yes, And the soot, you could feel the wind coming in the window and see the soot all around the edge of the window. When I got up that first morning, George took a look at me and he says, you better get into the restroom. I looked like a Negro. I was just that black from the soot. I had stockings on. We didn't have silk stockings in. They were a rayon stocking. And I had to take them off. They were so black too. And so when we finally got to San Antonio, we thought, that automatically our luggage would come off with us or something, and this bellcat came to us and said, hey, you better get your luggage off or make a way for it to change trains or something, or anyway, why, if it hadn't been for him, we'd have probably lost all our luggage. Anyway, we hit San Antonio on a Saturday night. A military town, nothing. What is it? The USO had nothing. They couldn't find anything for us. They finally told us of one woman who might have a place, and we called her, and she said, well, if she didn't hear from this fellow by 9 o'clock, we could come and take the room. And so she hadn't heard from him, so we went over there. And, of course, the car had been in storage all that time. And before we got over there, it stalled on us about a couple of blocks from the place. George went to the place, and the fellow came and towed us over there. Well, we'd had to sit on the suitcases to get them shut. And this carpet in this place, you should have seen it. Big, thick plush carpet, you wouldn't believe it. And we opened that suitcase, and it just exploded, you might say. And rice all over the place. George's mother had sneaked rice into the suitcase. Here, that beautiful carpet, all this rice going into it, it just embarrassed us to death. Before we went down there, George had picked up, maybe a dozen silver dollars, because they just didn't see stuff like that down there. And so before we left that morning, we told her about it, and George gave her a couple of silver dollars. We felt like maybe that would make things a little easier for her. Anyway, it was an experience.
So where'd you go after?
We went to Corpus Christi, Texas, and we had a garage apartment there. And so every morning I'd get up, and George would push the car out of the garage. I'd be under the wheel, and we'd get it started. That one morning, it wouldn't start. Well, we were on 1515 Ocean Drive, by the way, just across the street right here was all the river, or the sound, you might say, the ocean. And so it was about 3 blocks from the place before he ever got the car started. Fortunately, I had a robe on, didn't go out just in my nightie.
What would you do? Push the car and try to pop the clutch?
Yes, he pushed the car, and finally we got it started 3 blocks away. And so here I was sneaking back to the apartment all through the alleys. Anyway, we really had an experience, believe me. And I'd wash our clothes out on the washboard in the bathtub. And anyway, we had our first Thanksgiving there, and I stuffed a turkey, and I loved onions, and George didn't. And so after I put a half onion in the dressing, I had a half onion left, so I sliced it up, put it on a piece of bread, and ate it. Just after I'd gotten it eaten, George had gotten left off early and came in the door and gave me a kiss, and yeah. Oh, boy.
Well, Corpus Christi, that's a famous town, isn't it? Isn't that the birthplace of Steve Wood?
Yeah, that's the birthplace of Steve Wood. We changed houses before, or we got out of the garage apartment and had a two-bedroom house. So that's where he was born. Mm-hmm. Or you were born.
Where'd you go from then? What'd you do?
Well, Corpus Christi, where'd we go from there?
Traveled all over the United States, it seems like.
Yeah, we sure did. I'm trying to think where we went from Corpus. Can't remember when it was he brought me home. We came home for a visit in February. Steve was born in October, and we came home in February. And oh, we brought this other couple home with us. She was pregnant. And we started out this one morning and hit an icy spot, and it whirled the car around, and we hit into, I think, another car. And anyway, the car wouldn't go. We were in New Mexico, and the closest place was Albuquerque. And anyway, the first thing I thought of, I said, we didn't have prayer this morning. And that was the first thing that hit me, that if we'd have had prayer, this probably wouldn't have happened. But anyway, well, George had joined the church. The missionaries had gotten to him down there, and he had joined the church before we got married. And he was superintendent of the Sunday school there in Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi, by the way, was a mission branch. And he was superintendent, and they had me pass out the Book of Mormon and Principles of the Gospel to the serviceman. And so I'd have to keep my eyes open and get acquainted with all the servicemen when they came to church. And we held church in this this building, and second floor up, and every Sunday the men would have to get there and sweep out the cigarette butts and the beer bottles and everything before we could have church. And I was the youngest Relief Society visitor in the branch. I was 20 and went Relief Society visiting then.
Well, I suppose you got home safely after smashing the car up on the icy roads?
Yeah, we finally got a little guy in a Model T Ford or something to tow us. And it was a mess. It was rainy and everything, and the car didn't have any fenders on the back wheels, and so all that mud and rain would come into the windshield of the car, and George would have to kind of stick his head out to even see about guiding the car. When we got so far, this gal started having pains, and so we stopped and stopped a car, and this car took she and I onto Albuquerque, and her husband, and George was left with the car. And Steve was on a bottle, and so I'd have to get the maid to bring up boiling water to scald his bottles and get him fed and everything. And everything was fine. Got to Pocatello, and then Steve got sick. We had to put him in the hospital, and I had him under the steam with the cover over it, and the doctor didn't want to release him. He was in St. Anthony Hospital, but finally he released him reluctantly because we had to be back. We, at that time, had a 1943 Studebaker that we had gotten, which was real nice because we came up with the money before the other guy did. And otherwise another fellow would have beat us to it. But anyway,
That was practically a new car back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, it didn't have too many miles on it when we bought it, but we really enjoyed that car. I think that's it.
Well, Mom, you've been married for 50 years. Can you tell me some of the changes that you've seen during this time?
Well, I know this much. When George brought me back when he was, we went to Ogalley, Florida, and we lived there. We actually lived in a cabin and trying to find a place. And the thing that got me is I'd get up in the night, give Steve a bottle, and these big old water bugs would fly across the room. Just George had told me before we went down to Texas that there were all these bugs and everything, and you turn on the light and they'd scatter all over, and I just couldn't get used to that at all. And then when we had moved to Norfolk, Virginia, George had brought me home because he was going to be getting ready to go out on a carrier. And once I got home, I started canning everything. I was able to get everything was rationed then, but I went to the ration board and they gave me ration stamps for sugar so that I could can them, so I did a lot of canning. And then I had done, I did that before we were married. And the mother packed everything in this big trunk. And I don't know what we'd have done if we hadn't had all that canned stuff in that trunk for the first month, because it was kind of nip and tuck to get an apartment and everything, and we were sure thankful to have that. And then, of course, here again.
Earliest experience with food storage, huh?
Yeah, how true. And then George called, or had his, told me he needed me to come out there and bring the car out to New Jersey, because he needed a car. Excuse me. And so, but the ration board wouldn't give me the stamps for gasoline. And so George's commanding officer called the ration board. And so I was really a surprised gal when they called me on the phone and told me that I could have the stamps to go out there. And of course, I couldn't drive because I'm no good at driving. I go to sleep after the first 50 miles. I can go to sleep faster at the wheel than any place else. So George's brother Walt, he was only 17, said that he would drive us out there, Stephen and I. And I know this one place when we were getting gas, I mentioned to one of the service station men that I sure hope we had enough gas stamps to get us to Pleasantville, New Jersey, and he up and gave me some stamps. So I guess I took some black market stamps, but we were glad to get them. And George had this house there in Pleasantville. It was a 3-bedroom house, and it was real nice. We really liked it. And we went up to the to Atlantic City, to the boardwalk, and all this for a little country girl was really something for me, because I just hadn't been around at all, and going to all these different states and seeing these things, it was really different. And when I'd gone home, when he'd taken me home, I just couldn't get over the difference between the mission branch. It just seemed different at church than what a regular church was. I'd been there with the missionaries, and it just seemed different. I felt like that they were more spiritual or something. I don't know why. But, and then, when we, from Pleasantville, New Jersey, we went to Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia, and we hit Norfolk, Virginia in a hurricane. Now here again, that's something that
you'd never
is
experienced.
really an experience. The water was so deep, it was clear up to the running board of the car. Of course, we don't have running boards now, but anyway, and along the streets would be all these uprooted trees and just pouring down. We didn't know what we were going to do for housing when we got there. And George says, well, we ought to check through the church. And here we passed this LDS church, and George says, well, let's stop and go in. This was on a Saturday, and I says, nobody will be there. But he went in, and sure enough, there was this fellow there, and he told us, well, I'll bet you can get in where we're living. It was a housing unit, and his name was Yarbo Palmer. And he took us over there, and we were able to get into that housing unit, so I felt like we were really blessed.
Mm-hmm.
And then when George went out on the carrier Randolph, why, that was right the day before Thanksgiving, or Thanksgiving Day, one or the other, and then we headed back to Idaho, and Steve was real sick on the way. And, it just worried me to death. Finally, when we hit one town, I looked up a doctor and told him how bad it was and how much further we had to go, and he gave me some medicine to give to Steve. And it would just knock him out. But once I got home, I just collapsed in Mother's arms. The first thing I did was to throw all that medicine away. I felt like all it was doing was doping him. And the next day after we got home, he broke out with measles. So all the temperature and all the problem was him coming down with measles. But it was good to get back to Mother. There's nothing worse than the homesickness when you're away from home. That first Christmas, all it took was when we went, there wasn't any place to go really, and so a group of the Navy bunch went to this honky-tonk to spend Christmas Eve. And all it took was, I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas with Bing Crosby, for me to really break down and bawl. But it's been a real experience living in all these different places. Each place we've gone, I've managed to do things in the ward, and when we get to a ward, I'd go in and introduce ourselves. And when we were in Chula Vista, when he was in the Korean campaign, or was going down there for that, where I went in, introduced myself, and told him what positions I'd held. And right off the bat, we had positions, but of course we'd been back for quite a few years. We were back here in 46 then. And but we've lived in so many places. We've been down Foley, Alabama, and then George came back to that, back from there in 46 when he got released. And then we lived here until 52, when the guys were informed that if they would, they'd like to have them for the Korean campaign if they would enlist. And so George went back in. He was still Naval Reserve, and so he went back in for the Korean campaign. And but he ended up being a helicopter pilot there. He didn't fly the fixed wings anymore, so where before he'd been a fighter pilot. But anyway, we've seen a lot of changes.
Where have you lived? What towns?
Corpus Christi, Foley, Alabama, Pensacola, Florida, Norfolk, Virginia, Chula Vista, California. We lived for over a month in Los Angeles with George's brother brother-in-law Samuel Jack Smith and Betty, because he couldn't get housing in San Diego. And we were in Dallas for a month. And anyway, it's really been an experience, all these various towns.
I remember us living in Dallas.
Yeah, that's where you and Sid and Alan learned to swim in that
Right.
big, deep swimming pool. Always worried me to death. Never no shallow end. Yeah.
Yeah, I was so dumb I went off the high dive, something I wouldn't do now.
You what?
I would go off the high dive.
Oh, okay. It really bothered me there because, of course, being a little LDS girl and very modest and all, I had to go to the barracks to put a swimming suit on, and there was just this great big room, no little places that you could get into to disrobe, and you'd have to shower and everything there in front of all these waves. It just embarrassed me to death.
They ever say anything to make you
No,
feel funny?
no, it was just me and my modesty.
Uh-huh.
But,
Well, take a minute now, Mom, and tell us what kind of changes you've seen in the world as far as scientific advancements or other changes that...
well, of course, we've got all the nuclear energy now, which irks me to death that they don't take advantage of it. It'd be so much cheaper than electricity if the people could be converted to it. And all these hydro places and all, you talk about all the accidents and everything that caused so many deaths. Haven't been any from nuclear energy, but all these other things crumb it. It makes you sick when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
All the change in airplanes and automobiles and the attitude as far as sex and all of this crap that goes on. It makes you sick. The morals have changed so, and it just seems like the world's getting more wicked all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I've got to say.
Well, how about farming? That changed at all?
Farming? Yeah. Of course, my dad never did have any of this newfangled machinery or anything. And, of course, now these poor farmers, they have to go into debt and everything else practically to be able to make a living. My dad farmed, and from when we'd have the old threshing machine, and people would come. That's when all the neighbors would come in and help with it, and then you'd have these big long tables of food and feed them, and the threshing guys that ran the threshing machine would actually expect you to feed them for breakfast, and they'd be there for breakfast to eat too, besides dinner and supper.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been a lot of changes. The machinery for potatoes, which we always had two, or potatoes besides the grain and the alfalfa, and the way I went out I don't know how many times and helped stack up the shocks of the grain and pile up the hay and things like that.
You didn't bale your hay much back then, did you?
No, wasn't such a thing as baling. And then I'd end up riding the horse to try to herd the cows to keep them out of the potato patch and
Mm-hmm.
the alfalfa. And yep, it's really a change.
Being on a farm, I guess you were too busy to watch too much TV.
Who ever heard of TV? I listened to the radio, though.
What
One
would
of
you
my
listen to?
favorite ones was something Armstrong, champion of the world. What was his first name? Can't remember. I'd listened to quite a few programs on the radio.
Lone Ranger?
I don't remember the Lone Ranger, but
The Shadow?
no, I don't remember a lot of those.
Okay.
But anyway, right. And the books that have come out now, and audio tapes and everything, good and bad. There's
What do you think about something like this thing?
yeah, your video cameras and TV is really something. Before we used the little cameras, and that was it.
Well, you want to give any advice to any of your audience right now?
No, just live as we should and try to do the things that are right, where we never know what's going to happen in this life. And we've been told so long to get our storage and everything. That's one of the things that concerns me, and try to save a little bit, which is awful hard to do in this day and age, to prepare for the future. And like I say, all these earthquakes around and all, it's worry. I just hope we'll be prepared when it comes.
Well, we'd like to thank you, Mrs. Wood, for this interview today.
Okay.
Thanks, Mom.
You're ready to start.
I'm ready to start.
What's the red dot?
That means that we're recording you.
That's recording right now.
Uh-huh.
Okay. What shall I talk about?
Well, first, why don't you tell us who you are, where you were born, and when?
Who I am?
Yeah. Well, I know who you are.
Well, George
least-
C. Wood, born in Ogden, Utah, August the 1st, 1919. Moved shortly after that to Pocatello, Idaho. Grew up in about as humble a circumstance as I could possibly think. In a two-room house, but did have a full basement. But
Of
nothing
2
was-
rooms?
But nothing was finished. Just one big room. Later we put another room in there. But that didn't get finished either. We had wooden steps down into the cellar. You had to go outside to go downstairs. We had cold water only, no inside toilet. Didn't have an inside toilet in that house, as a matter of fact, until 1946 when I came back from war.
Is this the little house over by the Spud Bowl?
I was over by the cemetery. We lived on South 6th Avenue, 1304 South 6th. And along about 1934, 35, somewhere along there, they started building the stadium, which is now called the Spud Bowl at Idaho State University, in what amounted to our backyard. Actually, it was just across the line, and there was a canal there, which would have been down the alley if there'd have been an alley, but there was no alley. There wasn't a street either. It was just a dirt road coming up to our place.
How old were you when you moved from Ogden to Pocatello?
I don't remember, Steve. I must have been just a baby, just a very small baby, as a matter of fact. I've been told about different little things that I did, but I don't remember them. For instance, I was told about living up on the farm up in Crystal, and how I liked to go out and pull onions and eat them when I was a baby. I'd go out in the garden and pull onions and eat onions. Oh well. But I don't remember, I have no recollection, of course, of Ogden at all. None at all.
Was your dad a railroader there, or what?
Dad worked for the railroad a little bit from time to time, and I guess my mother was down there while he was working on the railroad. I really don't know. But grew up, Pocatello is my hometown, you might say, because there's no place else that I have any memory of at all in my young years.
Where'd you go to school here?
Well, my first year of school was at the Whittier School on South 4th in Pocatello, 900 blocks South 4th. That building is still there, you know. And then I went up to the Franklin Junior High School up on North 8th Avenue, and then graduated from Pocatello High School in 1938.
You had 4 years of high school, or 3 years, or what?
I don't remember whether I had 3 or 4 years now, but in any event, I had 5. I had one more. One of the,
Well, tell us about this.
well, we had some advice, and it was quite obvious that I couldn't afford to go to college, and so they decided that I should take commercial subjects instead of taking vocational garage mechanics and so forth, which I didn't especially like to do anyhow. I was to take commercial. So I took bookkeeping and typing and shorthand and things of that sort. The the typing and the shorthand was my downfall. I couldn't type fast enough to pass typing 1, and so I failed typing 1. And so I took it over again and passed it. Then they told me that I had to take typing 2 before I got any credit for typing 1. Now, why they didn't tell me that ahead of time is beyond me. And I was just damn poor counseling. But so I took typing 2 and I flunked that. And I took it over again, and with persistence I passed typing 2, barely. And I also took shorthand. And I could write shorthand to beat hell, but nobody could read it afterwards, including me. So I never did pass shorthand. I flunked that. As a result of those failures, well, it took me an additional year to get through high school. But on the positive side, I also picked up a couple of extra credits along the way that have held me a good stead since. Things that I just wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And much to my surprise, and everybody else's, I guess, well, I did get to go to college, primarily because I lived right on the campus, and I happened to get a job that summer. After searching all summer long, I finally got a job. And it was so, I still feel badly about that in a way, because this friend of mine, Willie Blackburn,
Mm-hmm.
came down to my house and he says, hey, I know of a guy who needs some people to work on a ranch, and I'm going to go up and apply for the job. Do you want to come along? Maybe he can use 2 people. And so I got in his car with him, and we drove up onto the ranch on Mashad Creek. And I was a pretty husky kid at the time, but Willie would weigh about 110 pounds soaking wet. And he walked up to this farmer and asked for a job. Understand he needed some harvest hands, and asked for a job. Farmer looked at him and says, well, I can't use you. I just can't use you. Then he turned to me and he said, are you looking for a job too? I said, oh, yes, yeah. He says, well, can you be up here tomorrow night? We start Monday morning. I got the job and Willie didn't. And what it boiled down to was, the farmer, I think, was probably right, because we really had to work, and it was hard work. I was bucking sacks of wheat around. At that time, we worked on a combine, and pulled by horses, by the way. And we worked from early in the morning until the sun went down at night. And I had to buck these sacks of wheat. I'd fill a sack of wheat and hand it over to the sack sewer, and he would sew the sack, and then I would move it out and pile it up until we had maybe 6 sacks, and then dump them and come along later and pick them up. And when we picked them up, well, we had to pick these sacks of wheat, weigh about 120 pounds a sack, I guess, and throw them onto a pickup truck. load them on a pickup truck, a flatbed truck, and haul them down to the mill, and then unload them again. All of this by hand, no forklifts, nothing mechanical, nothing, not the way they do it today at all. Just, we sewed sacks, and the sack sewer was an expert. He knew how to sew the sack fast, and the rest of us were just hard-working characters, and I don't mean maybe, but that was my first job, and I had enough money, and I got into college. That was in 1938, as I say.
Mm-hmm. Well, is that the year that you met Mom, or what?
No, I didn't meet her for a couple of years after that.
What'd you do in college? What'd you take?
I studied forestry.
That's appropriate with a guy named Wood.
Well, I liked to hunt and fish, and I had visions of having a job out in the forest somewhere and living an ideal life with trees growing around and wild animals and all of that sort of good thing. And I still appreciate all of these things to a degree, but didn't make it through forestry. World War II came along. I was doing a lot of things. I learned to fly. Incidentally, I learned to fly and had a pilot's license before I had a driver's license.
Oh, really?
Now, I had driven a little bit. I learned to drive in my grandmother's old Hupmobile. No, Hupmobile? No, it was a Graham Page touring car. I don't recall what year it was, but I think it's about 1924 Graham Page touring car. I think it'd be worth a fortune if I had it now. But I remember learning to drive in that, and I was mostly self-taught. And I drove a little bit later with Grant Williams. He always had a car, one from the time he was in high school. And that was handy because he always taking us hunting and fishing and to the dances on Saturday nights, Friday nights, Saturday nights. I dated with him from the time I was about 14 years old. We ran around together, went hunting and fishing and dancing and playing cards and the whole bit. A lot of good memories of him, and I think we were living life pretty well, in spite of the fact that I didn't have anything. I mean, really nothing.
You told me once how you'd shoot rabbits for your money and buy shells.
Hey, I saved every rabbit hide and sold rabbit hides and got spending money with it. I used to work up the golf course. I'd go up there. There was one guy, a fellow named Walt Ford, used to play golf, and I used to go up and caddy for him every Sunday, and I earned a magnificent sum of 15 cents for caddying 2 rounds of golf, 18 holes of golf for him, and I'd earned 15 cents. Which was enough to get me into the movies and buy me a Coke or something of that sort. And that's what I did. And I figured out every way I could of making any money. I'd go out and follow the new power lines that they were putting up, and they'd cut off little scraps of the wire, the copper wire, as they were going along, and I'd go along and pick up scraps of copper wire. I'd go out to the junkyards and find aluminum or brass or whatever I could find out there and take it down to McCarty's and sell it. And I'd take, one time, I think the most futile thing I have ever tried to do in my life.
A wool gatherer?
was that wool gathering. uh, I found out that wool was worth 65 cents a pound, which sounded to me like a fortune. I mean, 65 cents for only 1 pound of wool. Copper was selling at something like 5 cents a pound, and aluminum was quite a good thing if you could find it about 10 cents a pound or something of that sort. But wool at 65 cents, and I knew where there was some wool along these fence lines, so I went out along these barbed wire fences where the sheep had been walking by, and little tufts of wool had pulled off on the barbs. And I went along trying to pick up wool off of those fences. I don't know how many miles I walked trying to get 1 pound of wool, and I don't think I ever did. Wow, what a waste of effort. That was really one of the funny ones.
Well, how'd you keep going to school?
Well, I worked part-time. I got a job on the grounds, tending grounds, and then I worked into being a night watchman, and I'd polish floors, and I'd do just whatever had to be done. There was a fellow named George Smurthwaite, who was the grounds superintendent at that time. And he was a cantankerous old character, and everybody who worked for him, I think, was halfway afraid of him, but I wasn't especially afraid of him, but we got along fairly well. I always did whatever he wanted me to do, and took his words however he put them out and lived with him. I remember one time that I went to get my pay, and I had $10 more than I thought I had earned. I had $35 instead of 25, and I'd worked, I think, 100 hours, and so I was sure that if I kept it, that Smurthwaite would fire me for trying to cheat the university out of that $10. And so I went to him and said, "Hey, I think somebody made a mistake on my check. They paid me too much." He looked at it and says, "Well, I can give you a raise if I want to, can't I?" And that was that. From that time on, I got 35 cents an hour instead of 25. Yeah, I mean, that was a big raise. That was a big raise. A 40% raise is nothing to be sneezed at.
Mm-hmm.
But got that. One of my favorite jobs while I was working at the university was hauling coal. We had to go down to the railroad where they'd have a car on a siding down between 1st and 2nd Avenue. And we would pitch coal, slack, for the furnaces, out of this gondola car into a truck, a dump truck, and bring it up to the university and dump it, and then push it down into the hole to go into the bin. And for that, we got 25 cents a ton. Now, that may not sound like much, but hey, I could pitch 10 tons of coal, boy, you'd be surprised how fast I could shovel 10 tons of coal. And $2.50, hey, that was good pay at the time. I could make $2.50 in a matter of 3 or 4 hours. And I like that. I like that. And there's another guy that was working there, Bill Lyons. He later became a realtor in Pocatello. And Bill and I used to work at that. And we would go up there, and we'd get into that in that gondola car, and I'll tell you, there'd be a continuous stream of coal in the air, boy. We would just out there pitch pitching coal like you wouldn't believe. Then we'd haul stuff up at the university, dump it, get the truck out of the way, push that stuff down into the hole, into the bin, and back we'd go for another load. We could only haul about 2 tons at a time or something of that sort. I don't know how much the truck held, but it wasn't very much. But we'd get out there and we'd unload one of those gondola cars in just amazing time. But we worked at it. We really worked up a sweat. We didn't
I'd like
loaf
to,
around.
I'd like to see a picture of you after you got done shoveling that.
Oh, they had a shower down in the heating plant, and Bill and I incidentally both worked in the heating plant too. And they had a shower down there, so we'd have on a pair of coveralls or something of that sort, and we'd be black as ace of spades by the time we got through. But we'd go down and shower off and put on our regular clothes, and away we go. I worked in that heating plant, and I had the job there for a while of starting the heating plant every morning, starting it up at 5 a.m. I'd go down and work in the heating plant from 5 a.m. until 8 o'clock, until just a few minutes before 8, and I'd take a shower and get into my school clothes and go to class. And then I'd work, I'd go to class most of the day, and I'd come back and I'd work around the heating plant for a little while, and 8 o'clock I'd take over once a week as the relief man for the night watchman. And so on that week that I was taking over for the night watchman, I'd get up at 5 a.m. And, well, I'd have to be there at 5 a.m. and they had a time clock we had to punch, and I'd be there at 5 a.m. and start the furnaces going and get the steam up to heat the buildings at the campus. Work until about 8 o'clock, go to class, come out of class, work for a while until 8 p.m. that day, and then I would take on night watchman's work, and I would work as a night watchman until 5 a.m. the next morning, and then go back down to the heating plant and start the furnaces up again, and at 8 o'clock the next day I'd be through. That'd be, 28 hours at a stretch, and I used to do that quite often, but I finally, I would get tired. I can remember one time that I have to laugh about yet. I was night watchman and I was tired, and what I was seeing as I was going around, I don't know, but I came out of the men's dormitory on 8th Avenue, and I started across the street on my regular route. I had to go to the top of each building, or the top story of each building, on every round. And when I started across 8th Avenue, I walked smack into the side of a car that was parked there. Somebody had come between rounds and parked a car there, and it hadn't been there before. And I must have been walking in my sleep or something, because I walked right smack into the side of a car that was parked there, just where I usually walked. And I used to grin at, well, how effective was I as a night watchman? I was so sleepy that I was practically walking in my sleep. And but nevertheless, I did put in a lot of time. And then on Fridays and Saturdays, well, if I could, I'd take off and go dance over the 3rd Ward and the 1st Ward. They had dances, one place on a Friday night and the other place on a Saturday night. I don't remember which is which now, but every Friday and Saturday night I'd go to the church dance and dance until midnight. Take my girlfriend home. It was always in Grant's car. We were always double dating because I didn't have a car. Or maybe we'd take his girlfriend home and I wouldn't have a girl. I'd just have to wait for him. quite a time, quite a time. But we used to do some really kooky things. We'd go to a dance on a Friday night, dance until midnight, take a girl home, come back to the house, play pinochle until about 4 a.m. And then 5 maybe, something of that sort. And then, with our hunting gear, go hunting or fishing, whichever the case may be, whichever we want to do that weekend. And we'd go out and go hunting or fishing, and we'd want to be there at daylight when we could start hunting or when we could start fishing. So we'd stay up all night long, just all night, and this happened time after time after time.
You sound like my kids.
And we had a great time at it, though. We had a great time at it.
Was Grant going to college too?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, see, Grant was, compared to me, Grant was one of the rich kids. Now, his father had a regular job on the railroad. He was a painter on the railroad. And he had a regular paycheck coming in. And they lived in a good house with an indoor toilet and everything. And he had a car to drive. And he had some friends in California. He had some family in California. And he'd go down there in the summertime and work. And he earned enough to buy a car when we were in high school. And so he had all of the good things that I didn't. He was even good looking, and I was...
What kind of car did he have? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't recall, but it seems to me like it was a little Dodge coupe with a rumble seat in it or something like that. But I don't remember for sure what it was. Could have been a Ford. It could have been something else. But it seems to me like it was a Dodge or a Plymouth or something.
Okay, now
I don't remember for sure.
I haven't given you the opportunity to get your story straight with Mom about how the two of you met. You want to give me your version?
How the two of us met? Well, I didn't think there was any controversy on it. I didn't think there was any controversy at all. Here's a guy that you'll know. It was Bill Chandler and a couple of other guys went down to Lava Hot Springs one spring day to go swimming. And we got down to Lava, and here was a senior high school class from up there having their senior sneak day. Well, we just joined in. We were in college at the time, and we just joined in, and there was, we were all trying to find somebody that looked interesting in the pool, and I found Viola, and she was going to come up to the university for the university seniors day next week. So I made a date to see her the next week at ISU. Well, it was a southern branch then, but and that's how I met her in swimming.
Okay.
So
She looked pretty good in the swimming suit, did she?
yeah, pretty good, pretty good. You know, maybe not the greatest, but certainly nothing shabby. So.
Well, so tell me then how it evolved as far as romance goes. And
Well, I met her the next week, and we took a walk up on Red Hill, and came back, and I don't know, I saw her around the campus. I escorted her all around the campus that day, and I don't know, she invited me to come up to Idaho Falls or something, and I did, and we started dating, and one thing led to another, and here we are. Wow. You gotta be careful where you go swimming, I guess.
yeah.
But, no, that was,
Well, that was only 50 years ago or so.
yeah, That was about 1940, I believe. I think that's
Uh-huh.
about when it was.
Well, you were flying then.
I started flying. Oh yes, I flew up to Idaho Falls, and she and her dad met me at the airport, and her mother. Uh, I had started taking flying lessons, and I had to take a cross-country flight, and so I chose Idaho Falls and arranged to meet her there. I'd forgotten about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I used to, after she got out of high school, she went to work for some people right in Idaho Falls,
Sweeney's?
and Sweeney's, yeah. And so I used to go up to Idaho Falls. I'd hitchhike to Idaho Falls, and they had a passenger train service, and the train left Idaho Falls at midnight and came to Pocatello. And I think it cost about 50 cents to ride from Idaho Falls to Pocatello. It was quite a bit, I thought, but nevertheless, I was able to save up 50 cents every once in a while. I was getting pretty prosperous then. I was starting to make, by that time, I was making 40 or 50 bucks a month working at the university, maybe 60 sometimes. So I wasn't exactly a poor man anymore, except that I was giving most of it to my folks to help support the family. And so I had 50 cents to pay for train fare every once in a while, and I'd go up there and take her to the movies or something, and sit around and smooch until it was 7 minutes or 12 minutes or something to 12, and then I'd run to the train station from where they were. I think it was about 10 blocks, and I'd run down to the train station, catch the train back to Pocatello. Well, that's like Cinderella, when they're turning into a pumpkin and she didn't get back in time. Well, that's about the way I was. And every once in a while I'd miss the train and then have to hitchhike at midnight from Idaho Falls to Pocatello. That wasn't too good a deal.
No.
That was a fun deal.
Well, you joined the Navy. How'd that come about?
Well, the draft was starting up, and the military was. There was a lot of talk about we had to serve at least 6 months in the military for the draft, and I signed up for the draft, and so did everybody else. And I thought, well, hey, if I can get into the Navy instead of into the Army, I'm going to do it. Now, Bud Serrell decided that he was going to spend his time in the National Guard because he'd only have to put in 6 months in the Guard and could do it right there at home, and he wouldn't have to sign up for 2 years or anything else. So he signed up for the Idaho National Guard, and right after he signed up, they mobilized the Guard, and they let him finish high school. He was still in high school, and they let him finish high school. He graduated that spring, and then they shipped him off, and he got in on the invasion of North Africa, then Sicily, then Italy, and he was still fighting his way towards Berlin when the war in Europe ended. And if they say anything about Quayle being a draft dodger because he went into the National Guard, well, that's an insult to National Guardsmen all through you, that they seem to think that he was trying to get out of service. But in a way, I suppose that was true, because Bud Serrell thought he was going to have it real easy. He was going to get his 6 months in and out of the way, and spend it on weekends and that sort of thing around here.
Did you feel back in those days that serving your country in the military was your duty?
Well, as a matter of fact, yes, very much so, very much so. I mean, I just absolutely cannot comprehend the attitude that you leave the country to avoid the draft or avoid military duty. This is just completely against any principles I'd have whatsoever. I think Clinton, dodging the draft as he did, is no more worthy of being anything, let alone the President of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, were you talking about joining the Air Force or the Navy? Or?
Well, the Navy sent a recruiting team down to the university, and they told all of us about what a fine deal naval aviators had. And so everybody signed up. A whole bunch of us got together and signed up. As I recall, there were 23 of us signed up to join the Navy as aviation cadets. We would go in with the idea we were going to become aviation cadets. 23 of us. But out of the 23 of us, as I recall, 2 of us passed all of the examinations. I was one of the 2, and Vic Warning was the other one. I may be mistaken there. There may have been 3 out of the 23. But anyhow, the exams to get in, the physical and the mental and written exams were all tough. They were not easy at all.
That's pretty darn good.
And so this started that separation process right away, this Right Stuff that came out in a later book. And we went into, I went into the Navy. Grant was too short to get into the Navy. So he took stretching exercises so he could get into the Air Force, the Army Air Force, and he succeeded in getting into the Air Force later and became an Air Force pilot. But I had the right physical qualifications and mental and so forth to get into the Navy, and so I went into that. I went up to Seattle. Went up to Seattle in October of 1941, and that's where I was when the war started. And it always surprised me. I went up to Seattle and I felt like I was really among the elite up there in a way, and I thought, what am I doing here? I always felt that I was just extremely lucky to be where I was, and that I just was awfully lucky to be able to pass the tests, and I was really getting through that. And I'd see some of these guys from the University of Washington and places like that, and the University of Oregon, and coming in there and driving nice cars and all, and great clothing, and had all kinds of class, and flunking out. Couldn't fly an airplane well enough. And I said, what in the hell is going on here? Because I knew several of them. They call this, incidentally, they called it elimination flight training. And they literally eliminated people that they thought wouldn't make it as a pilot. They just wash them out and say, now you have 2 choices. You can just go on back home and wait until you're drafted. Forget all about this. Or we'll keep you in the Navy, and you can go on and get a job, another type of job in the Navy, but you won't be a pilot. And most of them chose to go out and start all over again. But I made it on through, lucky as could be.
You don't give yourself enough credit.
What?
You don't give yourself enough credit.
Well, I didn't. I didn't. Literally, I didn't. I thought I was. I thought I was just lucky, but no, I could do it. I could do it. Yeah, I had the right stuff, you might say. And one of the things, I was looking at some of the pictures in this book, and I was thinking, most of the time, I had a smile on my face. And most of the time I have had, all the way through. And by golly, that's all right. I was smiling most of the time. And I remember one time at Seattle, there was a Major Rice Weber. He was an old boy well, I thought he was awfully old then. I think he was probably 35 or something. And was a flight instructor at Seattle when the war started. And he took me out for my one of my rides, and before I soloed, the last ride before I soloed, a check ride. And it came back, and he slapped me on the back and says, "Well, son, do you think you can handle it by yourself?" Words to that effect. And I said, "Yes, sir." "Well, let's see you take off then by yourself and fly back there." I back, landed a time or two, whatever was necessary, and came back in, got my up, everything. Next day, the major was going out on a weather flight. They used to, a pilot would go out almost every day and look around the area because Seattle weather was terrible. Low, scuddy clouds and raining most of the time, and you had to go up. You had to actually get into an airplane and go up and see how high you could get before you got into the clouds. See if there was enough room to fly between the clouds and the trees and stuff. And we cadet trainees or whatever they wanted to call us, help with these planes. We'd go out there and we'd crank up the engines on them, and we would stand on the end of the wings, or out to the end of the wings on the runway, and make sure they didn't, and help guide them out of the pack of planes onto the runway. And this next day, Major Rice Weber was going to go out and check the weather. And I was one of the guys that was on his plane. And there was another fellow there with me, another cadet. We weren't cadets yet, but we were trainees for it. And we started running out, and pulled the chocks out from the plane. I said, "Just a minute, hold him here for a moment." And I ran over and I jumped up on the side of the plane there, and I slapped him on the back and said, "Well, Major, do you think you can handle it by yourself?" And my criminy, he turned around and looked at me with that icy kind of look. And I walked away from there and said, "Good grief, what have I done? Boy, I really blew it this time." But I'll bet they were roaring in the ready room when he was telling about this, because I got a kick out of it. Later I had a laugh. Nothing came of it, but he sure gave me a cold stare.
Well, let's see a picture of you as a pilot. Hold that up for us, a little close here.
Well, that was quite a bit later.
Okay.
I was a pilot. This, I think, was taken during the Korean War, actually, quite some time later. And
Well, before we go into that, let's talk about your marriage and your travels after that.
well, they're kind of all tied together because actually, when I went into the service, I had to pledge that I wouldn't get married for 4 years after I got my commission. For 4 years after I got my commission. And I don't know whose idea that was, but nevertheless, just somewhat, 2 or 3 months before I got my commission, a ruling came down from the Secretary of the Navy, whose name was Knox, by the way, at the time, that naval aviators could get married immediately upon graduation and upon getting commissioned.
Was that because of the war?
And it's probably because of the war. The war had started then. And so I don't know just how Viola managed to propose it, but anyhow, we decided that as soon as I graduated, well, I'd come back to Pocatello and we'd get married. Actually, back to I'd come up to Idaho Falls and we'd get married. So I graduated from Corpus Christi, got my wings as a naval aviator and all that sort of good stuff, and jumped on a train, came to Pocatello. Actually, I didn't get on a train at first. I started driving my car. I had bought a car in the meantime, an old Plymouth Coupe, but it didn't have very good tires. So I scrounged around and was able to rake up an extra spare tire or two. And I think I either had 2 spare tires or 3 spare tires. I guess I had 2. And I started for Pocatello with one other guy who was living from up in this neighborhood. And we got as far as San Antonio, Texas, about 150 miles from Corpus Christi. And by that time, we had blown out 2 of the tires that I had. And we didn't have any more spares, and we thought it imprudent to continue with the tires that we had, because we had put the best ones on to begin with. So I put the car in a garage in San Antonio, got on a train, came to Pocatello, and got married. And got on a train and headed back, got down to San Antonio, and got off, picked up the car, and drove back down to Corpus Christi. Now, to tell you what times were like at the time, in the first place, you had to get ration cards for your gasoline, and you had to get a ration card to buy tires. And I couldn't get a ration tire for tires, and I came to I came down there with this car, and every morning I had this car to drive from Corpus Christi out to the base, from our apartment out to the base, and starter wasn't very good, or the battery wasn't very good, or maybe it was both, I don't know. But every morning I had to go out and push the car to get started. Oh, but before that, the tires. I only had these 4 tires, and one of them had 17 patches on the inner tube. And I couldn't find the leak. It was just a slow leak, and overnight it would go flat every night. It would go flat, and I'd have that thing off and look. I couldn't find where it was going flat, and I wasn't able to buy another inner tube, and so every morning I'd get up and pump up the tire, and then I would get by in the car, and I'd push the car to get it started, because the battery would be so low that it wouldn't start. And then I'd drive to work.
Sounds like some of the other cars we've had, huh?
And that happened every morning. And incidentally, at that time, we had to fly for 7 days and take the 8th day off, because they needed more work. And that way it would rotate Sundays, so every once in a while I'd have a Sunday off, not very often. But 1 day out of 8 off. And go out there. I can remember pushing that car down the street. Most of the time, I just push it out of the garage, and before I got to the street, well, in the driveway, I'd have it started. But I can remember a couple of times pushing the thing a block or so down Ocean Avenue. We were right on the waterfront, pushing it down Ocean Avenue, and Vi walking back to the house with her nightgown on yet. I don't know what the neighbors were thinking, but they saw her out there. But we go out and work that. I finally got a chance to get a new car, not a brand new one, but a 1942 Studebaker. And this guy had been, he was a civilian, had been buying this car and apparently couldn't find a job or something, and he was about to lose the car. And I heard about it, and went down and made a deal with him. I would take over the payments. He had to have $50 in cash. And I went down and paid $50 in cash, which he turned around and gave to the representative from the finance company that was standing right there waiting for the title to that car or the $50. And I handed him the $50, and he handed that to the guy. He signed the title over. I took the car. I took the contract on the thing and paid it off. I think it cost $1,060 or something like that, brand new, and I got it for only 600 and something in my old car.
Mm-hmm.
And he was so delighted to get this old Plymouth where he had to pump up the tire and push it to start it, because that was better than nothing he was going to have.
Yeah.
And I was so delighted. Here I had a brand new 1942 automobile. Well, it wasn't brand new. It had a few thousand miles on it, not very many. But that was my first Studebaker. Here's one of these fuzzy little kind of things that we got our picture taken, downtown, and it'll probably cost us $5.50 for a portrait size. And there I am as an aviation cadet. This had to be in 1942, and it was before I became an ensign. And here I was when I was presented with this Distinguished Flying Cross last spring at age 72. And this was in 19...
Heck, you got better looking.
This is 50 years later.
How about that?
I just want to show those to you. There's another picture or two in here that... one of the things that I did, the first car I had any ownership in was this old car here. I think this was a Ford, if I remember right, about a 1936, 37, 38 Ford, somewhere along there. It was a pretty good car, and we bought it up in Seattle. 4 of us got together and bought that car and drove it down to Corpus Christi. And by doing that, we were each able to stop off at home. One of these guys lived in Portland. One of them lived in two of them lived in eastern Montana, Baker and LeGrand. And I lived in Pocatello. So we went down to Portland and dropped the guy off, and then we drove on to Baker and LeGrand and let those 2 guys off at these towns were close together, if I recall properly. And then I caught a bus to Pocatello. Then the guy from Portland stayed one day in Portland and caught a bus to LeGrand and joined the other 2. They drove on down to Pocatello and picked me up, and we went on down to Corpus Christi from there. When we got down to Corpus Christi, the three of us sold our interest in the car to the fourth one. And that was the first car I had any ownership in at all. And I owned 25% of it. And we made enough money from our travel expenses to pay for the car and pay for the trip. And it gave us a day at home, which we wouldn't have had if we had just simply taken a train ticket, which the Navy. Now, the old car that I talked about was this Plymouth Coupe. That's the one that I started to drive to Pocatello. That's the one that had the flat tire every morning. That's the one that had to be pushed to start every morning.
How old were you when you had your first car? About?
Let's see, I would have been 20.
Watch pictures on the back.
We got that in 1941, so I would have been 22 years old. I was 22 years old.
So where else did you travel and live?
Well, we didn't do too much traveling right at the time, and then after I got married, and there's a picture of us on the day we got married.
Good
I went
looking
back
couple.
and lived in Pensacola. We first lived on 1515 Ocean View Drive in Corpus Christi, and then we lived there for a few months, and then we were able to rent a better house, and we moved. Well, we stayed there at 1515 Ocean View until you were born.
Must be a famous city then, huh?
And yeah, it's Corpus Christi. And then we moved out on Cruz Avenue, which is a housing development out in Corpus Christi yet, but out of the downtown area.
C-R-U-I-S-E or C-R-E-W-S?
It was C-R-E-W-S,
okay.
I think, but I'm not terribly sure. But yeah, it says Cruz Street here, C-R-E-W-S, Cruz Street, and that was the first house that we lived in, but we were simply renting it. A lot of these things popping up along the way here. I see I was promoted to a lieutenant junior grade along the way.
Here you are as
A lieutenant junior grade. At least I still have a smile on my face.
Yep.
Things were going okay. I stayed there as a flight instructor at Corpus Christi for about a year and a half, or a little over a year anyhow. Yeah, for a year and 3 months or 4 months, something of that sort. And then I was ordered to the fleet duty, and I went up to Chicago and qualified on a carrier. So I went up there and got my first carrier landings on the old Wolverine and Lake Superior, and qualified there.
Was that quite as bad as the ocean, though? I mean, learning how to land on a carrier on a lake is a little bit different.
Well, that wasn't too bad. No, it wasn't bad. And, no strain. And then I brought Viola home, you and Viola home, because I didn't know where I was going to go next. And then I got orders into Air Group 87. No, I got orders first to Florida. And I went down to Florida and was flying F-6Fs. That's where I got my introduction to flying the Hellcat. And I went down there and flew Hellcats for a while and got all checked out in gunnery and bombing and just flying the Hellcat fighter plane. And then I was assigned to Air Group 87, which was a brand new air group just formulating up in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And we were going to be there for a couple of 3 months, so I sent for Viola, and your Uncle Walt drove you and Vi, and she did a lot of the driving too, but he helped with the driving, and drove us out to or drove you and Vi out to Atlantic City.
He was about 17 years old then.
Yeah, he was about 16, 17 years old at the time, and came on out there, and we later moved down to Oceana, Virginia, and we lived there for a month or two, and then I went aboard the carrier, and you and your mother and Walt headed back for Idaho. I went to sea on the Randolph, and we went down and went through the Panama Canal and came on up to California, and we spent a little time down in the Caribbean drinking rum and Coca-Cola
Just like the song?
and all that sort of stuff, you know. And then we came on up to California, and they had decided to change the formation of the squadron, the makeup of the squadron. And they decided that they would have a fighter-bomber group squadron. And before they had, the air group had consisted of a fighter squadron, torpedo squadron, and a dive bomber squadron. And now they decided they were going to have a fighter bomber squadron, a fighter squadron, a torpedo squadron, and a dive bombing squadron. So they took men from each of the three squadrons and made that the nucleus of the fighter bomber squadron, and I was one of those people. And then they brought in other pilots and increased the number of pilots in the air group. Mm-hmm. And I was, as I say, I was in the fighter bomber group, and they sent us to Hawaii on a Jeep carrier called the Copahi, USS Copahi. And we had the most crowded space there. There were these bunks, about 4 stacks of bunks in each little room, and barely room to get out and back and forth. But we survived that a week or two it took us to get to Hawaii. And we were stationed at Maui in Hawaii. And that was a pretty good time. We took the fighter bomber squadron especially had to completely retrain because we had people who hadn't flown fighter planes to speak of at all, and had flown bombers and torpedo planes, and they were teaching we fighter pilots the tactics of dive bombing. And so we worked hard at that time, and we were on Maui for a couple of months, 3 months, I guess, and really slaving. I got sent over to Barber's Point and became a photo reconnaissance pilot during that time. And then we went aboard the Ticonderoga in Pearl Harbor and headed out for Westpac. Went into combat from there.
Mm-hmm.
The first planes I flew while I was in the Navy were really fun planes to fly. It was the N3N, the so-called Yellow Peril. This was a little open cockpit biplane, fabric covered wings, and you could do all kinds of things with it.
Except go over 50 miles an hour.
Well,
right?
it was pretty fast, and I think you could get it up to maybe 150, really, if you were diving enough with it. And you could do all kinds of acrobatics. It was a fun plane to fly. At that time, we were issued our flight gear, which included, and this will blow your mind, a silk scarf, and our gloves, silk scarf, goggles, the whole shebang. A really great deal, and we were flying those planes. I came down to Corpus Christi and started flying the SNJ, which is the AT-6 of the Army. It was probably the best training plane the services had for a long time, both before and after the war. It had retractable landing gear. It was a low-wing monoplane, and single-engine monoplane, and a nice plane to fly, a very maneuverable plane, and it had all of the aspects. We were told if you could fly the F-6F, or if you could fly the SNJ, you could fly any single-engine fighter plane. If you could fly the SNJ satisfactorily, and it was a good plane to fly. They also had a couple of others down there. The Vultee Vibrator, which was similar to the SNJ, only their landing gear was not retractable, and about the same engine performance and so forth. But the J was much better plane to fly, a much nicer plane to fly. We appreciated it a lot. I used to like to fly quite a bit, so I'd take them up after an overhaul or after a repair job and test fly them and that sort of thing. I would typically get in considerably more hours than the average pilot at that time because I just volunteered to do it. But I became a flight instructor at Corpus Christi right after I graduated. And, before I graduated, let's go back to that. I also, in my training, I flew the OS-2U, the Kingfisher, and I flew it in both the float mode, which it had a big single float with two little floats out on the wings to keep it from tipping over, and I also flew it with the wheels. And later on, as a flight instructor, I instructed for a little while in that crazy things, and that was a weird experience. They were a big, lumbering thing. They were slow, they were heavy, they were not very maneuverable. I didn't like to fly the Kingfisher at all, and that was not my idea of a good. The only thing is, out on the water, on floats, it was kind of fun because it was a mix between speedboating and flying.
Uh-huh.
You know, you'd go out there and you'd have all the aspects of a motorboat, and you'd also get into the air and fly. But coming down and landing, you became a boat again. I flew those for a bit. I became a flight instructor, as I say, and I went back and flew first primary flying, and then in the SNJ, and then I went into the fleet squadrons and started flying the F6F. But I had an occasion or two to fly other planes, and I flew the F4F. Where's that picture now of these planes? You can see this.
Tip it forward. Yeah.
This one is the F4F, and it was one of the early Grumman combat fighters in World War II. And yes, it did see combat, and the Zero could outperform the dickens out of it. Then came the F6F, and that plane actually became the big fighter plane for the U.S. Navy. It was by far the best fighter plane in World War II as far as the U.S. Navy is concerned, and probably as far as the whole world is concerned, because it had aspects that were just, it came out with one record above all others that was really meaningful. For every F6F that was shot down by enemy planes, the F6F shot down 19 enemy planes, by far the biggest ratio of kills to losses. And then the top plane here, the little F8F, still holds a record as the fastest propeller-driven airplane. And I flew that after the war while I was still in the reserves, and I flew that out of Spokane up there. So I've flown all three of these planes. All nice planes to fly. The F4F wasn't too comfortable because you had to crank the gears up, and the cockpit was a little bit crowded. But they were all good fighter planes. Now, when I went back into the service, during the Korean War, I started flying helicopters, and I flew the